By 1991, SNK's Neogeo MVS and AES systems are in arcades and video game stores across the world. SNK is banking on the idea of bringing the arcade experience home with its roster of games.
The earliest games were a mix of sports and action titles. Baseball Stars was actually quite a cult hit as a baseball game. Then later on, you had a lot of fairly mediocre side-scrolling shooters and action games.
Ninja Combat.
Cyberlit. Magician Lord, that was a good side-scrolling action platformer.
Luckily for SNK, the coin-op business experiences a rebirth, thanks to the success of Capcom's Street Fighter II.
Street Fighter II came in the early 90s and defined the 2D fighting genre, and you saw a lot of other publishers and developers sort of hopping on board. SNK became, certainly the most successful company to follow in their footsteps.
The first game was Fatal Fury. It was the first kind of one-on-one fighting game that we had for the Neogeo. It had very good success.
Art of Fighting was their second fighting series.
Round 1.
Art of Fighting was the first 2D fighting game to feature a scaling perspective. The camera, such as it was, would move back and forth to accommodate either close-ups on really, really huge character sprites or a view of a really big background.
Samurai Showdown came out, and that was really the game that just took over everything. It put SNK on the map.
One factor contributing to the success of Samurai Showdown was the one-on-one fighting, and the setting was not present day, but it was way back in samurai days.
King of Fighters was a great idea. It took all of SNK's intellectual properties from SNK's past and put them all into one game. And it also created a new fighting system where you would pick 3 characters and you would fight them each separately on a team, and one after another until each of them died off, and then whoever would have the last guy standing would be the winner.
It's no surprise that Capcom, the creator of the Street Fighter series, and SNK become rivals.
I would say we were friendly competitors.
Capcom is, of course, famous for, if you ever played the Street Fighter Alpha series or the Capcom Versus series, there's a sort of cult favorite character, Dan, Dan Hibiki, the sort of goofy spin-off of Ken and Ryu. He was created as a sort of joke or rib by Capcom on the fact that SNK had, essentially sort of knocked off Street Fighter II to create its first fighting games.
We had so many good games coming out that were really trying to take over the throne from Capcom.
And the big joke, of course, is that Dan is the absolute weakest, crummiest character in the game. He's totally useless. And the funny thing about Dan is that he created his own sort of cult among Capcom fans who got a kick out of playing the weakest character in the game and, proving that, I'm good enough to beat you even with the lousiest character in this game.
While its rivalry with Capcom boils over in arcades, SNK looks to revamp the Neogeo AES to improve lagging sales.
The Neogeo CD was developed 2 years after the AES system had been brought home. AES system was wonderful, even though it was expensive. The cartridges, which were basically $200 and then $250 costs, it was just restricted.
The Neogeo CD was an attempt to solve the Achilles heel of the Neogeo, which is the fact that the games cost, $300-odd. The Neogeo CD was a CD-based version of the Neogeo AES. The problem with the CD was it was slow. It used single-speed CD-ROM drive, even slower than the double-speed drives in your PlayStation and Saturn. The games were afflicted with pretty much the worst load times in the history of gaming.
Despite promising sales in Japan, where 25,000 units are sold in its first day in stores, the Neogeo CD is a disaster in the US.
The CD was a nobly intentioned abject failure.
In 1997, SNK releases the Hyper Neogeo 64 Advanced Arcade unit, but the system fails. SNK's dwindling profits are now coming solely from arcade games such as Metal Slug. and the King of Fighters. In a bold bid to reclaim their losses, SNK will take on the king of the handheld market. It's 1998. SNK is still reeling from poor sales of the Neogeo AES, the disastrous launch of the Neogeo CD, and the failure of the hyper Neogeo 64. But that doesn't stop them from taking on Nintendo in the handheld market.
SNK had a shot. SNK had pretty solid software support for the Neo Geo Pocket Color. They managed to get some pretty good third-party games at the very beginning for the Neo Geo Pocket Color.
My goal, my plan for the company was to get a 10% market share at our peak. Now, admit the numbers may seem small, but we got to be 2% of the market.
The system fails. In Japan, only 10,000 units are sold.
In the end, you know, the Game Boy just proved insurmountable.
At the same time, the arcade business takes a hit.
There was a steady decline in arcades worldwide throughout the 90s, simply because of the popularity of console gaming.
By 1999, SNK is in the red. The company is eventually sold to a Japanese pachinko company named Aruze. 1 year later, SNK is a shadow of its former self. The few titles it develops are rushed and unpolished.
SNK, under their stewardship, puttered around with its later arcade games.
But not all the news is bad.
Round one.
That same year, Capcom vs. SNK is released.
SNK versus Capcom.
Well, with SNK's characters versus Capcom's characters, up to now, Capcom had Street Fighter, and we had King of Fighters. We took these both to make a 2D fighting game. What kind of fighting game could two rival companies make together? It was like a dream match come true.
Unfortunately, the majority of the profits for the game go to Capcom. Eventually, Aruze puts SNK into bankruptcy.
Aruze decided to pull the plug on them. They killed SNK in 2000.
By October 22nd, 2001, SNK no longer exists. But the company doesn't stay down for long.
Our chairman from day one, Mr. Kawasaki, it's really his company. When he had the opportunity to get out, he opened Playmore. Now, he couldn't use the SNK name, so the company he created was Playmore.
Unfortunately, the former SNK went into bankruptcy in October 2001. But we were lucky that SNK Playmore could obtain the IPs for the original SNK properties. So today, here we are.
They purchased the IP properties of the former SNK. So what they did about 2 years later was to rename the company SNK Playmore.
So essentially, they created a new SNK.
And its legendary family of games lives on.
They still have that cult following that will keep following them as long as they keep making the games that are their signature.
In the future, of course, we aim to have new platforms for the King of Fighter projects. For example, Maximum Impact is out on the home consoles. The King of Fighter series has made the transition into 3D. Naturally, I think that here on out, it's our duty to evolve our products. So that's the direction I think we'll go. If our fans demand it, we'll revive any of the SNK series. Rather than a revival, however, we would make a renewal.
We wanted to see how King of Fighters would look in 3D, and that was the start of it. It wasn't that the market was demanding that we change to 3D or anything like that. And for the most part, when we're making 3D visuals, it's better suited for the consumer market rather than the arcades. So we made it specifically for Maximum Impact on PS2.
We'll be bringing SVC Chaos, which is SNK versus Capcom, to the Xbox, and it will be fully live.
From now on, we'll continue the sequels and also make original titles.
And while the company is at the tail end of a wild ride, there is no denying its impact on gaming history.
Boy, do they have a huge following. I mean, even to this day.
Underdogs definitely draw their sort of cult following.
I mean, on eBay, some of the old cartridges, which we sold originally for $200, going, for thousands of dollars.
Not to underestimate the fact that they were really a force for technological and economic innovation in the arcades.
For me, when you say SNK, the first thing that comes to mind is not a particular game title per se, but an image that this is the only company that can offer hardcore games.